Okay, Raymond, let's go ahead and start. I've got 9:18. If we can call the meeting to order. You can call roll, please.
Sir. Raymond Theus, Executive Director of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority. For the record, there were no public comments received today. I'll run through the roll call real quick. Joyce Wilson,
Here.
James Smith,
Here.
Joe Wardy,
Here.
Dorothy Bird,
Here.
Nicholas Lamantilla is out. Marco Zaragoza, I believe he was going to join us online. Is Mr. Zaragoza online?
He has not joined yet.
Okay. Mr. Suter is participating online as well. So, Mr. Suter, if you'll keep an eye out for him, I'd appreciate that. Mr. Reyes.
Here.
Thank you. We do have a quorum.
Okay, item number 2, the adoption of minutes. Anybody have any comments or addendums to the minutes?
Motion to approve?
All
I
those,
second it.
have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Item number 3, presentation, discussion, and action on fiscal year 2021 audited financial report. You want to do a lead into that, Robert?
Yes, sir. Robert Suter, Director of Finance for the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority. For the record, sorry I'm not able to attend in person today. But last week, our Finance Committee reviewed the audit with the assistance of Craig Gibson and Sonia Sanchez of Gibson Ruddock Patterson, who are there in person today. And I believe the Finance Committee recommended approval. But first, I would like to give Mr. Gibson a couple minutes to address the board. Mr. Gibson?
Thank you. As Robert said, we had a good meeting with the Finance Committee, went over the report in a little more detail. This year's audit went very smooth. We were very pleased. Robert and Raymond have implemented policies and procedures that my colleague over here, Sonia, has requested, and they are working well. The audit ended up with a unmodified opinion or clean opinion, and we have no findings, no management points. So we're very pleased. The first part of the audit report is what's called the management's discussion and analysis. And, excuse me, that is prepared by Raymond and Robert, and they did a really good job this year kind of summarizing the year in non-financial statement format. If you haven't had a chance, I recommend that you look at that. I think they did a real good job kind of summarizing how the year went. That's really all we have.
Thank you.
Are there any management findings
No, ma'am.
or financial findings? Okay, great.
Then if I could get a motion, or Mr. Wardy, I see you have a question?
Well, I'd like to commend Robert and Raymond. I've been dealing with audited financial reports my entire professional career. I don't think I've ever seen one without a finding or recommendation. So I'd like to give kudos to them for an outstanding procedures and working to make sure that we're, I guess the word is bulletproof. And our meeting went very well, and I'd like to make a motion to approve.
I'll second it. Yes, thank you very much, and thank you, Joe, and everyone on the Finance Committee for your time, too.
Yeah, that is really amazing. Kudos to everybody. Okay, we have a motion. A second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you
Thank you.
very, very much.
Happy New
Thank
Year
you
to
for
y'all.
coming.
Sonia?
Happy New Year to you. Sonia, thank you. Okay, so item number 4, presentation update on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This is really gonna be good.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
I agree. Raymond Tejas again for the record. This item was actually requested by the board at last month's board meeting. The request was for an update on the infrastructure bill and some details and some perhaps some guidance on how the RMA can proceed. So what we've done is we've worked with Atkins as our general engineering consultant team. On this presentation, we actually have Erin Capps from Atkins, and she's online, so she'll be presenting. In fact, for IT, she's got a PowerPoint that she'll be controlling, if you can display that. But at the outset, I'll ask Ms. Capps to give a brief background. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to attend with us here personally, so I'm going to ask her to give a little brief background on her expertise so she can walk you through the PowerPoint.
okay, welcome, Aaron.
Thank you so much, and my apologies that I cannot be there in person. It was very painful to cancel that. I'm going to attempt to share my screen and see if this comes up for you here. And I'll wait a second to see, is that
It's up.
working for everyone?
Yeah,
Yes,
we
thank
have
you.
it.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So again, thank you for allowing me to be here today and to make this presentation to you. As Raymond said, I'm with Atkins. My experience is working in rescue and relief funding for local communities, state governments, subdivisions and associations since probably about 2000 when I started out in this, and really excited to present this to you today as we've been tracking this. So I want to get into this just a little bit of background. I know we have a limited time here this morning. I know that everyone has heard about the IIJA, or BIL is sometimes called, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, but a little bit about how we got here, because it started with the rescue and relief stimulus monies that came through. And importantly, this is not a stimulus package, but it is under Recovery and Resiliency for investment. And we've been tracking this, since March of 2020, how this has affected our clients and how we can help to maximize funding, whether they're looking at multiple sources. But of course, today we'll be focusing on the IIJA. I did want to draw your attention to the Build Back Better Act. That has not been passed yet. It's been referred to as the human infrastructure piece. The only thing I wanted to note is it is definitely worth still tracking. There are guidance and provisions in there that are much the same as what's in the IIJA, and there's some traditional infrastructure pieces of that as well. So we'll just see what comes with that, in addition to this transformational investment that we're seeing. So the total is 1.2 trillion, which is a huge number, and you've seen this in the news for what's coming out from IIJA, and it's distributed among these 7 federal agencies. Importantly, 567.5 billion approximately of this 1.2 trillion is going to the Department of Transportation. So a huge investment in infrastructure and transportation. We're not going to discuss some of the other investments that have been made, but you have, of course, I'm sure I've been hearing about some of those, whether it's for resiliency or water, wastewater as well, which are also key provisions. But today we're going to focus and really drill down on this distribution to the DOT. Of this, there's new funding from this amount, but there's also the baseline funding as well. And the new funding and baseline funding we're looking at is for new programs, existing programs, but primarily two categories of funding, which is the formula funds, and this is the allocation that are based on these formulas established by Congress. So you can think of that as direct, real money that is going to come to the states, DOTs, over the course of this. And then you have the discretionary programs, which you could also say are competitive programs. And these are the grants that are supporting the specific projects as they're addressed. So we're going to be talking about this funding in terms of, is it a new program, an existing program? Is it something that's formula program, meaning it's more of a direct allocation, or is this discretionary? So I wanted to lay this out at the beginning to give it a foundation. Importantly, the new funding, when we look at this for formula and discretionary programs, wanted to highlight here for you how you're seeing some of the same types of investments across the board. And why is this important? Because if you're getting formula funding already for bridges, which is extremely important, I know, to the area as well, and I know it's something that was highlighted by Representative Escobar as well on, the need for rehabilitation replacement on bridges in the area. But in addition to that direct allocation, there's also discretionary funding, competitive funding for bridges as well, with resilience, with electric vehicle infrastructure. So this helps you to start thinking about projects and prioritization of this. If it's not something you get under formula program, then it helps you to maximize that under discretionary. So we'll talk about those in a little more detail, but it's important to note that we see this across both formula and discretionary funds. This is a 5-year transportation reauthorization. This is, guaranteed real funds for 5 years from fiscal year 2022 to 2026. It is important to note that these are estimates because it's based on what will be allocated, and we're going to start to see a lot more clarity in that. There are estimates that are available online per state for each program, for formula programs each year. And so where you see estimates for us is we've taken those numbers and provided a general estimate just so you can have an idea. But Texas is one of the states that's getting a significant amount of funding under this, and rightly so, over these 5 years. So within the Department of Transportation, this money is being allocated through several agencies, and mainly we're going to be focusing on some of these programs under the Federal Highway Administration. And as you can see there, among these agencies, that's the most significant impact. Over $350 billion is coming to FHWA. And they are as well starting to put out a lot of presentations and notices and webinars on how this funding is coming through. And we'll talk some about that too in the watching and tracking of that. But as we said, these totals for each one, it's a combination. So it's going into formula programs, some are discretionary, some are new programs, and some are existing. So there's a lot of lists floating around out there on, all these programs and where the funding is. And it's important to note overall that for this funding, it is a once in a generation investment. Not only in the formula programs and the competitive grant programs are discretionary, but into new pilot programs. In an expansion on existing programs, many of the same ones that have been under FHWA or some of these other agencies, we're seeing more money go into those programs. We're seeing greater flexibility in the types of projects that are allowed. And we're seeing also a focus on projects, even a set aside for social justice, equity, and resiliency. And those will be some key themes that we're talking about. So I hope this so far is giving an idea of this flow of funding from the 1.2 trillion to the over 567 billion that's going to the US DOT, and then within that, where that fund is allocated. And so now we can start to break down what are the programs of interest that may be most relevant, that may be most helpful. So let's look at the significance then for the state of Texas. Approximately $32 billion in formula funding. And this is real funding, not waiting on any additional authorization. This is based on what is distributed nationwide to each state DOT. The reason it is an approximation is because, as I said, this is an estimate over 5 years. One of the things to note is it's an investment over 5 years, but even for fiscal year 2022, it's almost twice the funding that was available for the state in 2021. So just that alone, just thinking of formula funding, that's a direct allocation to the state. And for 2022, you're looking at double the funding for what you've had before. So that's significant. It is also a major investment for roads and bridges. This is where the majority of the funding is going. Almost 27 billion alone for highways, $500 million for bridges. This is hugely significant, and we're going to see that this is also available in discretionary ones for public transit, for electrical vehicle charging, and also for airports as well. So this is the funding allocation that is direct to the state and formula funds, and it's approximately 32 billion. We've seen some estimates around 31, 34. It kind of depends on how they're adding that up, but give or take, a significant investment for the state of Texas in directly allocated funds. But there's also an opportunity for an even larger pot of funding in this discretionary funds. I say this is an opportunity for Texas, but you could really put opportunity for Oklahoma, opportunity for Louisiana, opportunity for Florida, because these programs are competed nationally. And so it's important to note that the discretionary funding are competitive grants. This will require an application process. So it is a difference between where we have the 32 billion in funding formula allocations to this discretionary funding. What we've noted on here on these slides is the different types of projects. Each of these has significant amounts of information about that we could go into further detail. We'll talk about one of these in particular. But what we've noted here is which projects are new, and we have quite a few that are new. And as you saw at the beginning, almost half of that funding is new funding, new programs that are coming through. The Safe Streets program, Reconnecting Communities is a very interesting one. New funding for freight and rail improvements, and of course the electric vehicle charging. And then here are some of the other programs. We talked about the formula investment, over $500 million for bridges, 27 billion for highways, and then we have bridge and rehabilitation and replacement, over 12 billion in discretionary funds. Now, again, it's an approximation, it's an estimate, and these are competitive funds, and this is available nationwide. So you are competing to get this funding. But again, we are seeing the theme of set-asides, which also means prioritization for those projects that are focusing on resiliency, that are focusing on better access for those that don't have access to transportation, for this equity and resiliency, and then first and foremost, of course, safety as well. We took one of these programs for the new electrical vehicle infrastructure. This is one where 400 million is going into formula funds, but another 2.5 billion is going into discretionary funding. So the state alone, you're already receiving almost $500 million for formula funds. But now here's another bite of the apple. Here's an opportunity to apply for grants for discretionary funding, competitive funding under the electrical vehicle. So we've broken this down from the eligible entities who can apply. The types of projects can be acquiring or installing the electrical vehicle charging or alternative fueling infrastructure. So there's a little bit of flexibility there for operating assistance and for installing or acquiring traffic control devices. So quite a bit there within the projects. But there is a requirement that you need to establish a process or have a way to redesignate alternative fuel corridors, and also a 50% set aside, 50% for installation on public roads or publicly accessible locations. So think about parks and schools and those areas. Again, accessibility, equity, resiliency. We're seeing these themes again, and that's coming right here in this electric vehicle infrastructure program. So we've gone through how this funding is funneling down to the DOT, how it's distributed among the agencies with the significance for FHWA, and then what the significance for Texas is with that formula allocation, almost 32 billion, and the potential for competitive grants at over 120 billion. But what are the next steps? You know, we've gone through the how. What are the wins? Well, we're getting these annual allocations. As I said, 2022 alone is almost twice what was available for 2021. But with all of these competitive grants, with the discretionary programs, it is a lengthy process. It starts with that notice of funding opportunity, and that is detailed in that process on the DOT website, in fact, under FHWA. And those notice of funding opportunities will be released. We may be seeing these as soon as 6 months from now. Some of them start to come out for those competitive grants funds. So what can be done then? There's a need for this comprehensive oversight for knowing how you're going to prioritize these projects. Is it something where you can expect a designation under TxDOT designation, working with communities on that formula funding to set aside, or does it need to be prioritized for a discretionary funding? And, you know, what are the planning steps to go into watching and tracking those grant programs and making sure that you're maximizing the potential for all of these fundings that are coming through, and especially for the RMA. And with that, I know we had limited time. I hope I haven't gone over too much, so I'll open it up to some Q&A here.
This is Joyce Wilson. Do we have any idea at this point, like, what amounts are potentially already like targeted projects here in El Paso?
Unfortunately, no. The most that we have is it is an allocation, and actually that's a very, very good question. And I think I can go back to the slide on the 32 billion for that. Yes. So each of the state DOTs are going to set their plan for how this will be distributed and the access here for this 32 billion in funding, and that's where we're going to start to see how is this going to trickle down to El Paso directly. But I do not have that information at this time. I have not seen that specifically.
Okay. Raymond, are you aware of any conversations that the MPO has had with TxDOT?
No, not yet. I know that they are watching this very closely, and I've spoken with Eduardo a little bit, very briefly about it, but I can certainly check in.
Okay, and then opportunities for the discretionary funds in particular, we could do applications.
Yes, ma'am. In fact, I was mentioning to Mr. Smith earlier, in terms of next steps for this organization, utilizing those slides that Aaron walked us through. I think the next step from the staff side and the planning committee side would be to look through those buckets, identify areas where we think we would compete strongest, I guess would be the way to say that, and then really start to focus in on specific programs and application processes.
Okay, great. So and then we'll just rely on the planning committee to work with you and bring Eduardo in. I mean, I know that the city does theirs independent from us, but we have partnerships with the smaller jurisdictions in the county. And to the extent we can assist them in sort of expediting preparation and implementation, I think it would make us a lot more competitive.
Yes, ma'am. In fact, part of the evaluation of those different programs and buckets of funding through the planning committee will be evaluating areas where we can help. So, for example, there's an entire section that's devoted to tribal communities. So I'm wondering on our side if there isn't something that we could do to partner with the local tribal communities. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to come up with proposed projects and pitch them to area agencies to continue our partnering with each of them.
That'd be great. And actually reaching out to the tribal communities would be a good idea. I don't know that they've got sufficient capacity in-house to like maybe do some big projects. And there's a lot of money for them.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I see there's a question from Mr. Zaragoza, I believe.
Yes, good morning to all. So I wanted to ask, just when it comes to discretionary funding, who competes for these funds? Is it the city, is it the state, or is it private companies, or like certain areas of the Department of Transportation? Like who goes to the competitive bids here?
Oh, well, it's a question specifically for the area, but in terms of nationwide, it is the state DOTs a lot of times in partnerships, with an MPO, sometimes cities directly, where they have a Department of Transportation within their city, and they will go for that. So an example, like City of Atlanta, Georgia. So there's an Atlanta DOT, which is within the city, and they apply for a lot of these grant applications as well too.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And I think a lot of this will be highly competitive, but that's why the prioritization and planning effort is so critical. As you all were just saying, is looking at what is going to be allocated within those formula funds, so then you can really hit on those opportunities and maximize your time and resources, and bringing in potential partners. I love the idea of working with the tribal communities, because there is a specific set aside for tribal projects, and a dedication for that as well, and it's all through the FHWA. And then there's a lot of these projects that we listed. There's, one here. I just wanted to say point this out. Mega projects. There's maybe 2 sentences about this and what this means out there, which is, it's 15 billion, but this is ones that it's, a national infrastructure project assistance grant program. So, but it's looking at multimodal, multi-jurisdictional projects, ones of national or regional significance, a huge amount of funding there. And also when you are looking at, especially with the location with El Paso, and how you do work with, your neighboring communities, states, et cetera, and working through this, I think that would be one too that's of significance.
Okay, this is Jim. It appears to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the focal point for our region and our community is probably the MPO, and that we here for our board, for the Regional Mobility Authority, probably with the planning committee and some of the efforts that we've made is to coordinate very, very closely with the MPO, and this same thing going forward with a united voice, that we go after projects that and prioritize different elements as we go forward and present our case for our fair share of all of these available funds. And so my question is, I'm making the assumption, knowing Eduardo and the MPO, that they have already got this really high on their priority list and have all of this data that Aaron just presented to us. Is that a correct assumption?
I believe that's right. There were 2 recent articles about the Infrastructure Act that I shared with you all. I shared one of them in particular with Eduardo, and his response was, "Yeah, this is still moving. We're monitoring it." So yeah, I think that's absolutely right. He's knee deep in this stuff, monitoring it and keeping abreast of it. I think that's absolutely right.
So this stuff that we just got from Aaron here, this is all available to the MPO in this context, that he's got all of this. And
What I'll do is after the meeting, I'll share a copy of this PowerPoint with Eduardo. But I'm certain he's familiar with most everything we just ran through.
okay.
And one point on that, if I may, which is that, we highlighted this electric vehicle infrastructure program, well, for a couple of reasons. It's both in the formula funding and discretionary, but also with each of these discretionary programs, you see a breakdown of the eligible entities, and not all of them include, eligibility for MPO. So that's an important aspect to look at. But the FHWA has done an excellent job of breaking that down for every single one, and that direct funding. And so that's already a key piece on prioritization, as you're saying, working with that metropolitan planning organization and seeing where their focus and priorities are.
Would you say that again, so that all these funds for us regionally don't have to go through the MPO, that there are other paths to submit applications for that? Is that what I understood?
There are, and there are some, though, that I was going to say that an MPO is not eligible for as well. There's not a whole lot, but it's significant to look at, first step one in any of these discretionary programs is who can apply. And with the electric vehicle infrastructure, this is one that's wide open for all, but there are some where an MPO is not eligible to apply directly. And that's where you start getting into, partnerships or different methods for getting a project to completion and, getting it where you're going to get the most priority.
Yeah, Mr. Smith, if I could put a finer point on it too. I think we're talking about a couple of different things. One that Aaron was first talking about, and Aaron, correct me if I misunderstood you, but each of the different programs that have funding available have eligible entities that can pursue those funds.
Correct.
In each of those programs, the MPOs are not necessarily eligible for all of those programs. Just like local governments wouldn't necessarily be eligible for all programs. Tribal communities is a great example where the only eligible entity would be a tribal community, right? So I think that's one distinction she was making. But back to your prior point, which I think is really important, the coordination with the MPO is so important on a couple of fronts. One, we want to make sure that the RMA is not competing for a bucket of funds against the city of El Paso, by way of example, right? So we want to make sure that we have that single voice, united voice that you referred to earlier. So I think there's a level of coordination that should happen, and I think that should be housed in the MPO. A second point, though, that I think is also important is that if we want to use funding for any regionally significant transportation project, that project has to be within the MPO's planning documents. So that's another reason why the MPO is vitally important to be involved in all of these steps as we move forward to pursue some of these funds.
But there's also items that some of these direct things, just for example, like the electrical vehicle programs that we could qualify for individually and maybe partner with the city or the county or whatever. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Or partner with the electric companies. You remember we recently signed
correct.
the MOU to look at partnering on electrification initiatives. So that's right.
Okay, thank you.
This is Joyce again. I actually think we should use this as an opportunity to be really creative and bold. There's some areas here that we've not really traipsed in where we could be like a centralized vehicle for a really broad regional, like mapping out the EV charging infrastructure, those types of things. And also working again with these smaller entities where they could be impacted fairly significantly by some of these projects. And I think we should explore that mega project because the Northeast Parkway might be might fit that category, frankly. It's multi-state. It has, it's a diversion off of the highway, which has national implications. I just think we need to make sure we understand what each of these categories are and just be really creative and take advantage of the opportunity here to get as much leverage as we can to pull these funds down and be an active partner in helping to shape it.
Yes, ma'am. Agreed. I think that those conversations will start on the staff side, and then we'll bring that to the planning committee, and then eventually the full board. But we can talk about strategy in terms of whether this is a conversation the full board should have. However you want to do it, we can talk through that once we start to go through some of these different programs.
No, I have confidence in the planning committee to really house that. I just think there's some areas to explore that we've not had the opportunity to do so in the past, and so let's just push the envelope.
Certainly.
And then you all can bring back to us if you want, at the appropriate time, to the full board.
Yes, ma'am. We'll do that.
Okay. Silver?
I just wanted to comment, and I wanted to ask Aaron, back before this slide that we're looking at, there was one that said, I believe it was Wildlife Crossing. Can you give us a little more information on that? And the reason I ask is because in the last time when we had the Stimulus Act, there were areas in there that traditionally El Paso wouldn't even be interested in. One example was there was funding available for tree saplings. So what I did through my office was request 100,000 saplings, because back then we were talking about the river trailway, along the Rio Grande. And what I did is I went to the Tiguas, and I asked them for their support for that through the, there was, I don't remember if it was exactly a tribal project but there was one for Native Americans in there. And I wanted their support for that project because they have those ceremonial, especially around the first of the year, the ceremonies for different things celebrating their culture. And at first they were reluctant because they thought they would lose negotiation along in their own tribal strategy. But long story short, we got those 100,000 saplings for that trail. That was the good news. The bad news is, if you recall, around that same time, we had all those forest fires that decimated a bunch of the forest in the western part of the United States. So what they did, some of my colleagues from those states came to me and said, hey, can we negotiate that 100,000 down, and we will support maybe something that you need in the area of transportation or the area of, because there was funding for national defense for Fort Bliss. And so I did cut a deal, and the bottom line was they also went to the president and asked the president to declare a national emergency for restocking the forest. So our saplings went along. They got those, but I did get their support for stuff for Fort Bliss. One of them was the warrior, the Wounded Warrior building, and we got that became the #1 project in the whole country from the national defense
That's cool.
area. So there are places where we normally don't think we can play in, but if we've got like Raymond and others in there looking at those non-traditional areas, we can, if we can't get it directly from the funding that's available, in Congress they can do that trading.
Trade-offs.
Yep.
And remember, we're the Rio Grande River is the national historic. I forget. Do you remember, Aaron, what it's called? We're a designation of a national historic river or heritage.
Yeah,
river?
I think it's is it federal lands of national significance, so they have a way that they designate it under FHWA where they have a set aside for that. So a couple of things with that. So specific for the Wildlife Crossings project. So that is through FHWA. that is in formula funds, and then there are some for the discretionary as well, but importantly, formula funds. I mean, this is an allocation. And so it's under the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. It's the same one that allows for the electrical vehicle charging on the formula side. And it's the eligible projects that were added in addition to EV were the wildlife crossing projects. And this was a focus on, the state being able to use funding for projects in more rural areas and set aside, and it requires states actually to work with the MPOs for using this sub-allocation of funding. And so that is where that specific funding is coming for the wildlife crossings. Right now, the information that's available is just that that's a type of eligible project under that Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. That's a formula fund. So that, from what you're talking about, it kind of hits on a couple of different areas, or maybe even three. One is that, formula funding and allocation. A second would be, as you were saying, about, for designation for tribal lands. And then another might be for projects with a focus on rural areas. So there would be a few ways to go about that, depending on how you wanted to refine that project.
So there are what I call non-traditional.
Non-traditional available monies, yeah.
Available money that if sometimes it's not so much that we'll be able to get that money, but we'll be able to trade off with other areas of the country
Yeah.
that do have access to that.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
You were a master at it, so, I mean, okay. Okay, yes, Miss Byrd.
I have a question. Is there a limit on the amount of funding or different programs as a total that you can actually apply for? Is there any kind of limit to that? You understand what I mean? What I mean by that?
Yes, I
Okay.
understand what you mean by that. And so it would depend. How's that for the legal answer? But specifically, it would depend because as you are applying for, I agree with what's been said. Go for looking at creative ways, partnerships, applying for as most as possible. In the receipt of that funding, that is where you need to look at when that award is being made. I wouldn't say there's a total limit on, you've received too much funding, but what you have to ensure is anytime you're using these funds that there's not a duplication of benefits across other programs, that it's not being funded through, another association, that it is not being covered under another project, or maybe even another program outside of DOT. So that's where that limit would be, is, just ensuring you're not duplicating the benefit, getting funding from areas on the same project, because you can even combine funds for different pieces of projects. So it would be, after that award is made, to ensure that there's not a duplication of any of those benefits.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Aaron. And I think we got our work cut out for us, and you as our engineering consultant working with staff, your help will be very, very important as we go forward and coordinate with all the other entities. So stand by, because Raymond's gonna put a lasso around you and pull you into this. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much for the time. Again, apologies that I cannot be there in person. Really appreciate it. And I appreciate the Texas lasso reference.
Okay.
We're here.
Okay. Okay, Joyce, as far as the planning committee and stuff like that, we're gonna go talk, separately offline with you with some direction of where you think we ought to go with this and how to go about it. So thank you very much. Any let's go on to the next item. I think we got some timelines we need to worry about, Raymond. So item number 5, discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the execution of an agreement with respect to Socorro Transportation Reinvestment Zone Number 2 with the City of Socorro, Texas regarding Nuevo Waco Tanks Road Project. Raymond.
Thank you. So I've got some graphics to share with you all. This is a really exciting project, and we have discussed it once or twice in the past. It relates to the Regional Mobility Strategy 2020 program that's coming out of the El Paso MPO. On the screen right now is a visual of what's noted as City of Socorro's Transportation Reinvestment Zone Number 1. I would note that there were some issues in implementation of TRZ Number 1. So Socorro went back later and adopted TRZ Number 2, which is identical to TRZ Number 1. So if you notice, to orient you up there towards the top right-hand corner, you're looking at I-10. So the TRZ is shaded, and I suppose that's pink maybe. The TRZ starts just south of I-10 and runs down Nuevo Waco Tanks Road, which we built for them, if you remember. We designed and constructed in partnership with TxDOT that particular project for Socorro. It runs all the way down to Alameda, which is, well, actually the TRZ goes further. TRZ almost touches Socorro Road, if you notice. The blue line there shows you Nuevo Waco Tanks Road, both the initial phase, which we helped design and construct with TxDOT, and then the second phase, which is what we're talking about today. So the second phase begins at North Loop, which is, I don't know if you can see the cursor. Yeah, there we go. So right here, this is North Loop. So this segment here was the first phase, which is complete and open to the public. The second phase, which they'd like to pursue, begins at North Loop and goes all the way down to Alameda. So that's phase 2. So they have an existing TRZ Number 2. What you see as item number 5 here is an assignment agreement, an agreement that mirrors the relationship that we have with the City of El Paso and its transportation reinvestment zones, which in essence, through this agreement, the TRZ revenues are assigned to the Regional Mobility Authority for development of Nuevo Waco Tanks Phase 2. What we envision in this one's a little bit different because the City of Socorro is already underway in terms of design. So they're designing this project as we speak. Once the design is complete, then we will utilize the TRZ revenues to either go after a state infrastructure bank loan like we've done with the City of El Paso, or we'll really evaluate all the different approaches available to us to complete the construction, and we will handle the construction of this particular project. So that's really what this item is about. As you can see, this went before City of Socorro this last Thursday, before their city council, and it was approved. So subject to your questions, I would recommend approval of this item.
All right, any questions? I'll entertain a motion to approve.
I'll move.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, item number 6. Discussion and action on board resolution authorizing the execution of the following instruments related to the addition of certain water line improvements to the Pelicano Drive roadway project. A, project contribution agreement with Job Materials, and B, amendment to work authorization number 27.8 with Atkins North America. Raymond?
As read into the record, this does deal with Pelicano, which is a 2013 Comprehensive Mobility Plan project. The reason for this item is that Job is an adjacent property owner to the Pelicano project. His facility, he's looking at doing some additional improvements to his facility. So what he's asked is that we add tie-ins to the water line that runs underneath Pelicano. So what you see here then, the two different agreements under under 6A, it's a project contribution agreement whereby Job agrees to provide the funding necessary to make these improvements. So they're covering all of the costs. And what you'll notice in the agreement is that what we will do is we will issue a change order with our construction contractor for Pelicano, which is JAR Construction. They will do the tap to the water line and leave a valve. At that point then, and so again, Job is paying for that work through the change order. They're also paying for the inspection, management, and oversight activities that Atkins will do, and that's what you see under 6B. Once the valve is installed, then Job will do the rest of the work to take it from the valve into his facility. The design work for all of these activities were done by El Paso Water. And so we will do the construction of the tap and the valve, and we'll leave the valve there for them, and then we'll do the oversight as well. Again, 100% cost to Job. So subject to your question, I would recommend approval of items 6A and B.
Any questions? Entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Okay, motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion carries.
You know what, I should have mentioned this, and in fact, I'm going to ask you to pull up the visual. The backup that I had provided to the board, I apologize for this, I meant to bring this up. The draft that I provided to you all was revised after I submitted it to the board as backup. So I wanted to go very briefly through these red lines. These red lines are now included in your board backup folder, but I did, for the record, want to go through these. The majority of these revisions, especially under sections 1 and 2, relate to a clarifying that Job had requested. And I think these are all good improvements. It clarifies the work that I outlined to you all before. JAR through the RMA is doing the tap and the valve. Job will take care of the rest. So that's what you see under the red lines of sections 1 and 2. And 3, the revision there makes another one of those clarifications and notes that Job can hire a contractor or do it within his own forces. That's what those revisions are. We've added Ralph Richards as the point of contact for Job. The indemnification has been revised to note that if there is arbitration that finds Job is responsible for a percentage of any issue that arises, Job would be responsible for paying our attorney's fees for that same percentage as well. So just a clarification there. And then finally, or actually second to last on this page, Job revised the signature block to note that they are an LP and the signatory is through its LLC member. So that's what that is. And its final revision is again making a clarification about the revisions, about the responsibilities of each party. So I apologize, and I would ask you to take a motion to adopt, to approve item 6A with the revisions as read into the record.
I have a question.
Jim, I have a question.
I have a question also.
And I assume that by tapping into the water, they're paying for the water that they use, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
My question has to do with the funding. I know it said that it was going to be $83,058 with the additional of the 20%, which brings it to $100,905.10. Has that part been revised in these additions that you have just stated?
None of these revisions to the agreement have any financial impact.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Any other questions? Do we need to have a motion to accept the amended resolution? Is that correct?
The amendments, let's see, a motion to approve item 6A with the revisions read into the record.
Okay. I will entertain a motion. Okay.
I'll second it.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, carries.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's all right. Item number 7, discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the execution of an amendment to work authorization number 1 with AECom Technical Services, Inc. for the El Paso County Passenger Shelters and Sidewalks Program. Raymond?
This revision is required, as you may recall, AECom is doing the work necessary for certain shelters and sidewalks that the county has requested through various funding sources. This particular amendment to their work authorization is to allow for the moving of a shelter that was originally planned for a certain location that conflicted with certain TxDOT right-of-way. And so TxDOT has asked us to move it. This work is for additional survey work necessary to relocate that shelter. And it's for $1,765.40.
And that's within, I see Sal's online now, this is all good with the county?
I believe so, but I'll ask Mr. Alonso to chime in.
Good morning, everybody. Sal Alonso, El Paso County. Yes, we do concur with this change order. We've looked at it carefully between the county and, of course, the CRMA and our GC, the Atkins. So we're okay with this change order.
Okay. Any questions?
Thank you.
I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second, motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item number 8, discussion and action on a board resolution establishing scoring criteria and authorizing the issuance of a request for qualifications for a general engineering consultant. Raymond?
As read into the record, this is for a procurement. As you may recall, every approximately 5 to 7 years, we go out for a new procurement for our general engineering consultant team, and we are at that point now. So what you see under item number 8 then is a resolution authorizing the executive director to do 2 things. One is actually for you all to adopt the selection criteria and scoring identified within the resolution. I'll walk you through that very briefly. And then the second is to authorize me to actually issue the request for qualifications, which is the procurement process that we utilize to select a general engineering consultant team. I've also provided in your backup, but not for distribution, the current draft of the request for qualification, so you can review that and let me know of any concerns. Otherwise, we intend to issue this procurement next Monday, January 17th. We think the process should take roughly through March of this year, at which point I'll be bringing forward a recommended general engineering consultant team for approval. We will utilize the same process that we did last time, which is a selection evaluation criteria, evaluation team, similar to how we did it last time and how we normally do it. We'll ask for partner agencies to participate on that evaluation committee, whether it's the county, the city, TxDOT, or other agencies. We'll utilize them, and specifically, hopefully, we can get professional engineers to serve on that evaluation, because we are looking for a selection based on qualifications. So very briefly, the scoring criteria that's outlined there in the resolution, included in your backup and online, in fact, is experience and ability of the firm is at 40 points, approach to the services is at 30, and staffing would be at 30, so a full 100 point scale. Subject to your questions, then I would recommend approval of this item.
Any questions? I'll entertain a motion to accept.
I second it.
Okay, you have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, item number 9, discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the issuance of a request for information for the Weiler Aerial Tramway Project.
Now, this one is a little different. If you recall, the Weiler program, we've broken into the tram itself. The project, we've broken it into a couple of different components. The tram itself, which would require design and construction of the actual tramway, and then all of the additional improvements necessary to service that tram. So that would be visitor center. There would be a viewing platform up on the aerial, up on the mountain. All of those things that would then support the tramway. What this request for information, or RFI, is doing is it's going out specifically to the tram providers and asking them for industry input on the way that we are structuring this procurement. This RFI process, I should mention, is really very useful. We utilize it in instances where we have unique procurements. We did this actually for the streetcar project, where initially we had intended to have a single procurement with one team that would do the car remanufacture as well as all of the design and construction of, or excuse me, all of the construction of the actual tracks and maintenance and storage facility. During those industry reviews, we heard very clearly from those that do the track and those that do the vehicle remanufacture that we ought not to bring them together. It was going to cost us more. It was going to cause a bunch of problems. So that's the reason for the use of an RFI process, and that's why we're utilizing it here. We don't do a lot of tram procurements, as you can imagine, right? So we're putting this out specifically to the tram providers to ask them about, and we lay out in the RFI, which you have as part of your backup, we lay out the proposal, the project information, all the details that we think they would need to make some valuable industry input. So that's what this item is about. We intend to issue this one today, subject to your approval. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
You have any questions? I entertain a motion to approve.
I'll move.
Second.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, item number 10, discussion and action on board resolution authorizing submission of an annual compliance report to TxDOT. Raymond?
This item is pretty straightforward. You may remember this from prior years. This is a requirement that TxDOT has, that the board approve the submission of a compliance report. That compliance report is drafted and included in your backup. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, I would recommend approval of this item.
Are there any questions? I entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second? Okay. Have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Item number 11, presentation discussion on the following performance reports for the first quarter of fiscal year 2022.
Good morning, Robert Studer for the record.
Mr. Studer?
We took these 3 reports.
yeah.
Mr. Studer.
I need to read those in, don't I?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, I'll start again. Presentation discussion on the following performance reports for the first quarter of fiscal year 2022. A, interim financial statement. B, investment report. C, El Paso Bike Share Sun Cycle Program. And D, general engineering consultant teams, use of local resources. Okay, Robert, you're on.
I'm sorry, Jim, to rush in like that. Robert Studer, Director of Finance for the record. The first 3 reports, A, B, and C, the interim financial statement, investment report, and the Sun Cycle program reports were all taken to the Finance Committee last week, and that committee voted to approve those reports. Normally, we just provide them to you all so you have them as backup and don't go through them. So if you'd like me to, I can, but typically we do not.
Okay, we're
Did
good.
the committee flag any concerns?
No, the committee provided excellent feedback on Sun Cycle, gave us some insights on how we might be able to help boost some ridership and some opinions there. We went over briefly on the investment report that the Fed is going to raise rates in this upcoming year, and as they do, we will be looking for more aggressive options to improve our yields. And then the interim financial statement, we quickly discussed that a lot of our activity in the first quarter of the year is related to prior year activity because we have delays in receiving and paying invoices, and so there's not a whole lot to discuss on that interim financial statement.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, do we need to a motion to approve that, Raymond? Just for information?
That's right. Just for information, no
Okay.
action necessary.
Any further questions? Okay, so that item then next is we come to the fork in the road. Do we need to take one direction or the other? And so do we have anything that needs to go into executive session?
No, sir.
Okay. With that being said, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. The time is at 10:21.
I'll move. And thank you, Jim, for conducting the meeting. It was a good meeting. Great job.
And I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, thank you, guys. Happy and blessed New Year to everybody, and,
Stay safe out there.
okay, you too. Take care of yourself.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.